Hello and welcome back to another video here with me, Meoni, for Final Fantasy XIV. Today saw Live Letter Part 51 broadcast live on Twitch, and without going into too much detail, the whole thing had a ton of technical difficulties. It was way past 4 AM by the time I started to collate the information, so bear with me here, I'm quite tired. Jumping straight into the live letter, it was actually split into two parts, with a break in between. The first half looked at the gameplay experience with changes that are set to come in Shadowbringers, and the second half will be more focused around in-depth battle system changes per job. To skip the rehash of what we already knew from the other live letters and information, the first new thing Naoki Yoshida, producer and director for 14, talked about was the gameplay adjustments. Fates are being changed to give more than just experience as rewards. Additional requirements must be met to gain new rewards apparently, and one such method is acquiring new tokens from the Fates themselves in zones to collect, which they show an example here of some of these tokens being traded to a pixie vendor over in Ilmeg, a new zone in Shadowbringers, for a number of new items on this vendor window, such as an Orchestron roll for the zone, crafting materials, and even riding maps for the areas affecting your movement speed whilst you're mounted in that zone. This is to increase the usability of Fates other than just for experience. There will be a change to side quests in Shadowbringers to level sync all of the side quests that Shadowbringers adds so that you can do them all from level 70 onwards. The reason for this change is to make it easier to level up alternate jobs without having to worry which ones you reserve for those alts without your fear of level requirements. Additionally, a new type of quest will be implemented called a role quest. They say that players are leaving the source and going to the first, but there are actually heroes on the first that you can track down. You retrace the journeys of the first fallen heroes, and they say at least one of these quest lines will be needed to have been completed for your role for the main scenario storyline to progress. The role quests then are heavily tied into that main storyline. All new jobs obviously will have new quests for the 60 to 70 ranges to give them storyline, backstory and learn new abilities. And all jobs in the game will have a new quest as usual at the level 80 cap. Crafting and gathering classes are now being split down into 5 new disciplines. Stories will be centered around the Crystarium city on the first, with a collection of the finest artisans of that world gathering. There are now the facets of forging, crafting and nourishment, along with the facets of gathering and fishing, which make up the 5 storyline disciplines. They say hone your skills as you progress through the storyline of a crystalline mean, which is described to be similar to the custom delivery system that we are used to. Next up is the user interface changes. Firstly, they show the new light UI option, which is a new way to display the game's UI elements in a bright coloured background. This is presumably in response to a popular third-party application that people made to do just this, and so they've made their own. This will be available as an option as well as the traditional dark theme we're used to in the display settings of the game's UI. With the recent addition of a world visit system, in 5.0 we will now have access to 8 cross-world link shell spaces, so there's actually no excuse in Shadowbringers to not join multiple, which is pretty great for people who have statics. Target information will now be displayed to show lower percentages, so now you can see a 0.8% wipe instead of a 1% wipe. This was done because with the inflated numbers of the expansion, it's quite hard to know what exactly 1% even represents, and hopefully this will be more understandable. Housing gets a quick mention with a new furniture preview mode mentioned, where you can apparently preview the placement of items, and then it says "and more" at the bottom, so presumably they are changing a few things with how furniture works, hopefully for the better. And now onto the battle system changes. They are implementing a new charged action system, which basically allows for certain actions to gain charges over time and allow you to stack them to use them with more versatility. They use shoulder tackle for Monk as example. You'll be able to gain an additional charge as the recast timer cycles, allowing you to use it when you want. These happen outside of combat as well. Abilities have a maximum amount of charges on them, so they aren't infinite. They showed the example of a dancer in-game, where basically one of the actions had a tooltip that mentioned a maximum of 3 charges on that ability. She actually used a charge forward ability on that dancer, and the ability was cycling, giving him back a stack each time it cycled, even outside of combat. It's stated here additionally that not every job will have this charge mechanic. There will actually be a new way to discern interrupts as of 5.0. When you now interrupt an enemy's ability's cast time, you'll be able to see if an ability can be interrupted at first, as the cast bar will now be highlighted as they show here. You will also get a very understandable notification of when you successfully interrupt that ability, with the interrupt text covering it. They say that ranged DPS and tanks will receive role actions for this purpose, but do not mention melee or healers here. The role actions themselves are getting the ability to customize them completely removed. Instead of picking from a list of 10, you automatically gain these abilities when you reach certain levels on a given role. Tanks are said to have 7 actions, healers 6, melee 6, physical ranged 6, and magical ranged will have 4 role actions. They want to cut down on these as much as possible, so some have been deleted completely and others redesigned. Next, the MP and TP systems. Firstly, TP is completely removed from the game. They removed it completely and made the upper limit on mana 10,000 for every job in the game. Piety for healers will now simply increase the mana regen instead of adding to the mana bar itself, but they say that Piety will only affect the healer roles. Actions that use TP have either been revised to use mana or have been completely removed. Main attribute giving materia will no longer be obtainable in 5.0. This is to make gearing easier apparently. The main stat materia will be completely unobtainable, so any you have socketed will be completely useless when Shadowbringers releases. They wanted, for example, to instead put strength and vitality on all tank accessories, which will be retroactive, and prevent the argument of melding vitality or strength during progress, so you will not be able to meld strength or vitality at all. The weekly token gear, as well as savage accessories including belts, will now have 2 materia slots to compensate for this, and the stats will be adjusted accordingly. Next up, they talk about the pet system. Pets will no longer be affected by enemy attacks or player attacks, which is a big one, and they won't just die mid-fight. Hallelujah. Pet actions will also be removed from the pet hotbar itself, and they have been recategorized as player actions for the pet jobs. They show that existing pet actions for the summoner pets will actually be consolidated into one ability rather than multiple. This essentially makes any pet viable. Titan will no longer be a tanking pet, for example, and they are all practically the same, which you'll see more of in part 2 about jobs much later. Next up is additional battle adjustments. Usability is their focus this time around with the expansion, and the battle system calculations have been adjusted and changed accordingly. The May the 29th embargo on the Media Tour attendees will, once lifted, show these calculations and finer adjustments they say, so for finer details you'll have to wait for that, although in part 2 of this live letter they do show quite a lot of stuff off. Next up, they talk about how chain bonuses are being removed from dungeons. They want to standardize experience gain in dungeons so that one of them isn't more useful having more chainable monsters than another. That experience is instead being baked naturally into that monster upon its defeat, so you don't have to worry about losing your chain. The damage limit of the game has raised to 9,999,999 from the previous 999,999 because of the inflation in numbers in Shadowbringers. They realized the numbers in this expansion are huge and could get ridiculous by the end of the 5.0 cycle, so they have plans for 6.0 in that expansion to do a number squish and change those values, because no one really wants to be lagged out by numbers. Party bonuses have been adjusted to account for the number of players filling a role. They want to make it so that the limit gauge fills in a more standardized way, removing the cheese tactics that some people employ in speedruns and prioritizing setups focused around filling that limit break the fastest. There will also now be a new indicator on health bars, showing how much of a barrier is on that target from a shield heal. Healers have asked for this for the longest time, and it's finally here, and as you can see, this yellow bar on the HP bar is the remaining barrier on that target, which is just amazing. So that wraps up part 1, and part 2 kicks off with a trailer for the new job abilities, which I'll link below. We're not going to look at that today, since at this point, without labels, it offers very little. It just shows them, it doesn't actually list the abilities, and it would be better to focus on the actual things that were discussed in this live letter itself. So they wanted to focus on talking first about player role balancing and role synergy. In order to address rigid party composition and the perception of certain jobs being essential, they made the synergy effectiveness of certain jobs much less so. Abilities with slashing, blunt and piercing resistances have been removed from the game entirely to take that first part of the synergy away. They also revised some of the other actions instead of removing them outright, just taking away those buffs from the actual ability. It varies apparently from class to class. Whilst this synergy is being removed from everyone essentially, they do point out that Dancer is being made quite synergistic with the focus on its buffs. Next up, let's talk about the tank role in particular. Firstly, adjustments will be made to account for the main and off-tank sub-roles. They debated for the longest time apparently on how to address this best, but they ultimately decided that all 4 tanking jobs should be able to main or off-tank. They gave all of the tanks defensive buffs that can be applied to all party members. They gave additional buffs designed for off-tanks to support the main tank, and also removed DPS stances from all tanks, and made it so that you simply toggle tank stance on or off. These stances have been adjusted to give buffs to enmity overall, and health pool increases only whilst in that stance, so there is no drawback from being in tanking stance. They wanted tanks to emphasize primarily in Shadowbringers on doing as much damage as possible to the target, and not worry so much about enmity or stances. Skill rotations apparently will not change when alternating between main and off tanks, and they have made doubly sure that the tank stance generates a lot of enmity on its own. They are adding the tank mastery stat that gives you a 20% reduction in damage, as well as the bonus to health and damage dealt like I said previously. Next up, they talk about healer roles. In Shadowbringers, healers have been adjusted to emphasize on pure healing. Protect has been completely removed for starters, which I had amazingly predicted previously. So that damage reduction is probably accounted for and already baked in without having Protect. The new actions will be added to address gaps in each of the healers' repertoires to bring them closer in line with each other balance-wise. White mages, for example, receive a new instant heal to mitigate the cast time of its other abilities. Lilies, they say, are still here, only now they generate over time and not directly from using your abilities, so that's all automatic now in the background. They say White Mage and its powerful direct healing didn't allow for much movement, and they want to make it so that they are more mobile. Most of their skills are now instant cast to allow for healing on the move as a result. They also mentioned that in the higher levels, White Mage now gets a new Black Lily that blooms and grants a powerful offensive spell, which sounds awesome. Scholar is mentioned as they talk about pet actions once again. Direct heals and barrier magic is to be adjusted, they say. Apparently not much functionality has changed, but they wanted to give them more direct healing spells to help them share the responsibility with other healers like White Mage. The fairies, Eos and Selene, are confirmed to be much like Summoner, to be completely aesthetic, and you can choose either as they are now practically the same. They mention a new ability called Summon Seraph, which is actually an ability to summon on a big cooldown this Seraph fairy that does big heals, similar to Bahamut but for Scholar, so big heals on a big cooldown. Astrologian gets a mention where they say stances and card effects will be adjusted accordingly, so each card you draw gets a damage increase regardless of the card, but the element of dealing those cards to the party members has not changed, so you will still have to redraw cards, for example. They have decided to separate the recast timer on draw and play to prevent conflicts with that in particular, and you will get an action apparently that for a limited time allows you to use some of the other skills from the other stance you are not in, so from Nocturnal stance if you're in Diurnal, for example. To finish the healer section off, they mentioned that all of the offensive actions of healers have also been reviewed and changed accordingly, so we'll have to wait and see what that means. The DPS section is next. They mention how the design concepts will be more traditional and mechanics have been revised accordingly to that. Monks, Dragoons, Ninja, Samurai, Black Mage and Red Mage saw the least changes overall. These saw much smaller evolutions with more minor additions and changes in the grand scheme of things. Monks specifically have a 4th stack of Grease Lightning added to them. Initially they thought this would be too much to handle, which is why it wasn't added in Stormblood, but after feedback they decided to add it here in 5.0. They additionally made it possible to use an ability to apparently keep those stacks as well, instead of losing them for use later on. Dragoon saw the simplification of its combos overall. They wanted to change specifically the condition on which Mirage Dive would be activated, and overall they made their jumps much faster. It looks like a hell of a lot more faster in combat. Samurai didn't see much of a change, but they expanded their skills with some new abilities, notably making mid-air Setsuga easier to use and apparently more smooth, whatever that means. Ninja is said to lose the actions that mitigate enmity completely, and some of the actions they perform apparently got new conditions to use. They're pretty vague on some of the jobs, as you might imagine, just to let you know. Just to reiterate here, I completely forgot before, but Paladins saw a gap closer as well. They wanted to mention that. They didn't really talk too much about tanks in particular, but notably they did say that Paladins getting a gap closer or a charge ability, which is pretty cool. Black Mages, first of all, they added a new spell called Umbral Soul. They say when you're under the influence of Umbral Ice and use Umbral Soul, it gives you a stack of Umbral Ice and 1 Umbral Heart, and also resets the cast timer on Umbral Ice. Your DPS usually drops when an enemy dies, they say, and they want to reduce that ramp up, keeping your DPS up. Other changes include the addition of a new set of spells for 5.0, and they also lengthened the time of Astral Fire's uptime from 13 to 15 seconds if we saw it correctly on the stream. They wanted to put simple evolutions into Black Mage, and with, I think they called it Xenoglossy, which is an instant cast 750 potency ability you can use whilst moving, consuming 1 polygot stack, Foul stacking to 2, and a new ability called Despair, which is described to be like Flare but only for single target. They're certainly spicing that up a little bit. They also mentioned that mana shift is no longer in the game, so no more mana shifting healers, which should make some casters quite happy. Red Mages saw very simple evolutions. They made it so that you have more abilities whilst you move, so you can accumulate that black and white ether much easier. They apparently made Displacement, i.e. the jump back ability, no longer kill you when you're on ledges. How that's supposed to work is anyone's guess, but it's supposed to limit the death from using it on some boss platforms. And they also mentioned that all casters in the game now have an AoE of some sort, and they wanted that to be very clear. Bard, Machinist and Summoner, however, got the biggest changes. Machinist is currently undergoing such extensive changes that literally they said it's practically a brand new job. They wanted to address the complexity of the heat gauge and decided to make it so that filling the job gauge should be a good thing, and added a new battery gauge as well, which when filled allows you to summon a powerful robot to fight by your side. They changed so many abilities by the looks of it, it looks absolutely ridiculous from the job trailer. They also removed notably Gore's Barrel and special bullets in general, and they wanted to make Machinist more about someone who uses machines and not just a gunner, so we'll have to wait and see how that works out. Summoner saw a change to Ruin 4, which is apparently now activated by your pet's actions rather than from the player, so they say it will be easier to manage and control. The Eggy you call out will now be instant, so there are no cast timers on any of your summons. You can also use any Eggy you want in any situation, and you can swap between them instantly. In addition to Bahamut, you can now summon Phoenix, which is another powerful DPS cooldown, which looks amazing on that trailer. They also mention at the end that you will no longer need to worry about accumulating ether flow before going into combat, so presumably it refreshes out of it. Bard saw some changes. They wanted to address its synergy by basically removing the majority of it. They removed the crit song for certain. I'm not really sure about the other songs. It was a little bit vague. They wanted to remove apparently the stress points of playing Bard and make it far more comfortable to play. They say the soul voice gauge is unlocked at higher levels, which ultimately unlocks more powerful actions. And finally, Dancer. They mention how the emphasis for this job is on buffing primarily. With each dance, you perform steps, and so with dancing, you actually choose a party member to be your dance partner. By choosing a partner in your party, you can apply buffs to your partner, and your partner can apply increases to your job gauge with every successful weapon skill action on an enemy. So presumably this is not as useful by choosing a partner black mage. It has to be something with weapon skills that actually deliver. Your partner will get a debuff to say that they are actually your chosen partner, and there are two different types of dance, a standard step and technical step. The standard step is a more casual dance with only 2 steps. Steps are these coloured icons that appear on your UI, and you press the corresponding icon in the order shown to perform the dance and put out a buff. The technical dance has 4 steps, which is a little like the theatre-driven game, or sort of like Simon Says. You need to do the same coloured actions to the icons on screen and put out these buffs, and every little buff you apply to yourself apparently also gets put onto your partner as well. Dancers also have different steps depending on their range to the enemy, and apparently each dance gets faster steps as the combo continues, which is quite interesting. They seem to, from the footage shown in the live letter, be doing more buffs than attacks, but they do obviously do DPS as well. And that pretty much wraps up the entire section talking about jobs. As I say, they seem to be waiting till the embargo lifts on the 29th of May to show the more detailed action details, and will probably give priority to those media tour attendees, so no doubt we'll see that info posted around the internet pretty soon. The rest of the live letter talks about promotional things, such as they announced they'll be at E3 this year, as of the 10th of June, where people attending can actually fight Titania, the new trial in Shadowbringers, and actually play other elements of Shadowbringers early. There will also be a live letter during E3 on the 14th of June at 3 PM PDT, or 10 PM GMT, which is something to set our clocks by for sure. They also talk about a new Final Fantasy peripheral that looks pretty much like the Razer Nostromo, which is set to come out later this year, and they finally announced the benchmark is actually coming out today. In fact, it's probably already out by the time this video actually uploads. Thank you all kindly for watching. Let me know what you thought of this live letter in particular. Apologies once again if I got anything wrong or missed something. By the time I'm done here, it's likely going to be past 5 AM with no sleep. So enjoy your day, and I'll see you all next time.